Let's get the latest on everything in Gaza with Dr. Alon Burstein. He's here with me. There's been so much discussion as of late that even though the ceasefire has been called and even though the IDF has withdrawn to that initial line, there continues to be killings within the enclave. A lot of people have questions about who exactly Hamas is fighting with. How do you answer that question when people ask you?
It's good to see you, Austin. And yeah, the situation is very complicated. And, a lot of people are thinking the fighting's over. Why is there still fighting? And it's not just between clans. It's also important to note there have been between reports of 5 and 9 Palestinians that were killed in Sajaiya in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip by IDF fire that is also associated, I will say, with these clan rivalries that we'll talk about in a minute. But the fighting is, the main war, so to speak, has come to a halt, or at least a pause. But then there's this infighting and there's also these little clashes still happening with the Israeli military. What these clans are is basically two different developments. One is an older development in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip historically is like a lot of areas that were very impoverished and suffered a lot of wars. The Gaza Strip suffered a history of occupation, both by Egypt and by Israel. A lot of times you have the development of strong clan-based connections that end up becoming, when there is lawlessness, warlords. We saw this in Afghanistan. We saw this in Iraq. We saw this in Syria. We saw this in Yemen, Algeria, Libya. This is not uncommon for areas like this. So there are some clans, like the Durmush clan in Gaza City, like the clan that is somewhat affiliated with Rami Halas and others in Han Yunis, that is more really an older clan that was a rival of Hamas 20 years ago, sort of went dormant and then reemerged now in this era of lawlessness during the war. Then there's another version of clans, and the biggest of these is the most famous one, the Abu Shabab clan that is operating in Rafah, and that is also known as the Popular Forces. That's different. That is, Abu Shabab was, to be frank, a local criminal, a local thug, who, under the cover of the war in the last 2 years, and specifically the lawlessness in Rafah, because Hamas was kicked out of Rafah, Abu Shabab amassed around him a militia, and that militia ended up being affiliated with the Israeli military. Sometimes more explicitly, sometimes they actually cooperated with them, handed over Hamas operatives, received weaponry from them. Sometimes more implicitly, they agreed to secure trade routes that the IDF said they'd like secured. In turn, the IDF turned a blind eye when they would rob some of the aid or things like that. So we have these two different versions. Some of these are really old-based rivalries with Hamas that Hamas is now trying to just take advantage of in order to take out. And some of these are actually new organizations that have started cooperating with the Israeli military that now Hamas is trying to both take revenge on, but also to ensure that they don't get too strong in the Gaza Strip.
There's been accusations from the Hamas side that some of these groups are in some way working with Israel. Is there any merit to that?
Absolutely, I will say. First of all, again, there are some groups that openly say that. The Yasser Abu Shabab group, the group that is operating in Rafah, which is, again, this area down here, that the Israeli military still entirely controls, and Hamas doesn't really have a presence there. He amassed a militia around him. Some reports said 300 members, some reports said 1,000 members. They openly cooperate with the Israeli military. They openly secure trade routes for the Israeli military. They also openly said that they were going to cooperate with the Palestinian Authority, and they said they even had public announcements that they were calling on Palestinians to volunteer to join their security establishment and receive 3,000 shekels a month, 5,000 shekels a month for officers. That's between $1,000 and $2,000 a month. That's a lot of money. That's clearly coming from Israel. That militia does not have that kind of money in the Gaza Strip. So some of these openly operating within Israel, with Israel. And very interesting, one of the things that we've seen also, and this relates back to what I said about the Israeli military carrying out airstrikes in Sajaiya. Sajaiya is in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip over here. So the Israeli military is controlling an area known as the Yellow Line, and really it controls this area. Everything from here to Israel is controlled by the Israeli military. And there were some reports of Palestinians that had approached the Yellow Line and then were taken out by the Israeli military. And 2 days later, it was reported that the reason the Israeli military attacked them was not because they were posing a threat to the Israeli soldiers. It was because they were posing a threat to a Palestinian militia that the Israeli military is allowing to stay in that area that is under still the Israeli military's control. Israel has an interest in developing these militias. A more cynical approach would be that the interest is to cause an uproar of almost civil war within the Gaza Strip against Hamas. A less cynical approach would be as some sort of vision for a day after plan to say there needs to be a rival force in the Gaza Strip that is not made up of Hamas. One thing I have to say, and this is just one of the issues, because this is a repeated thing that militaries do. The United States did this in Afghanistan. Different countries did this in Syria. Different countries did this in Libya. There's this assumption that if you just arm these militias and pay them off, they will be on your side. Generally, historically, that is not proven to be accurate. But more than that, within the Gaza Strip, yesterday, there was a report that you cannot get a more damning report than this, that Hamas has taken over 45 pickup trucks and big larger trucks that the Israeli military had given to these militias. Within those trucks, according to the report, money, hundreds of guns, ammunition, and also heavy weaponry. That was given by Israel to these militias, and Hamas has now taken that over as part of its fight with the ongoing militias. So what we're looking at in the Gaza Strip is a spiral right now into some form of chaos. It is possible, this is now speculation on my part, there's no report of this, it is possible that Israel and maybe the United States would prefer to see chaos and rival factions rather than Hamas just reasserting control over the entire strip. I don't know that. But what we do know is with those militias, some of them being protected by the Israeli military, and Hamas meanwhile regaining its strength and regaining its weaponry, we're heading towards this internal clashes.
This is what President Trump said on social media earlier today. If Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Thank you for your attention to this matter, he says. We don't have any specifics here. At first, people were wondering if Trump was talking about the U.S. going in and killing, because he says we in this statement here, but then he further clarified, he said that no, there's forces that are much, much closer to Gaza that would carry this type of stuff out. What does this kind of rhetoric mean for the ceasefire?
So when he says there's forces that are closer to Gaza, I mean, he very clearly is meaning the Israeli military. And, Trump has used this rhetoric also with regards to the hostages. In that clip that you played before, he said, we got our hostages back. There were no more living hostages with U.S. citizenship. They were all Israeli hostages. Trump has viewed this as part of, I think, his alliance with Israel and as part of his way to, you could say, entice Israel into the deal or force Israel into the deal. But whatever it is, he has used this as looking at it as is our war with Hamas. And therefore, when it came to, for example, the peace conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, you don't even need Israel represented. The United States is there representing our side, so to speak, Israel and the United States. So I think, first of all, when he says we will go in, I had no doubt that he's not talking about sending U.S. troops. The last thing Trump wants to do, he's inconsistent about a lot of things. One of the things he's very consistent of is he does not want to send U.S. troops into foreign wars. So that's in terms of who is we. But in terms of what this will mean, this message, I'll say at best, is unclear. Because on the one hand, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we'll have no choice but to go in and kill them. Well, the deal says that Hamas is supposed to disarm. The deal has nothing to do with who gets killed in Gaza, so to speak. The deal is that Hamas should disarm and should not actually be in control and govern the Gaza Strip. Now, to large extents, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that Hamas needs to disarm and disappear, but also we'd like them to just stop the killing and then somehow that would be okay. Both sides right now are looking, Israel, the United States, and Hamas are accepting sort of this interim situation where Hamas is de facto regaining control in the Gaza Strip in a lot of different ways. It's deployed police officers. It has started to collect taxes. It is starting to, again, enforce its new regime of law and order. Israel's not attacking it. The United States is not attacking it. So it's being accepted that that's happening, but we don't want them killing people. That's an unclear statement, because if we're accepting that Hamas is going to regain control on the Gaza Strip, even temporarily, guess what? Hamas runs a violent dictatorship. That's how they've always run. So if that is a violation of the deal unto itself, then the ceasefire has collapsed and we're going back to fighting. If that's not a violation of the deal because it's an interim position and we're hoping that eventually they disarm, then realistically, there's going to be no backlash to that. So seemingly that statement is Trump trying to say, stop it, but I don't actually see any reality in which Trump would say, because Hamas is attacking Palestinians, the Israeli military can now go in and restart the war. That doesn't seem consistent with what he wants.
You touched on this earlier. I want to ask you to expand on it. Does a divided Gaza benefit the Israelis?
So historically, most quote-unquote Western countries that end up fighting these organizations that are, in some cases, solely Islamists, in some cases like Hamas, more mixed nationalistic and Islamists, often they tend to think that it is in the interest of the country, Israel, United States, but others, United Kingdom, France, they tend to think that, okay, there is an interest in split the organizations, get the local population to fight against each other, and then you'll weaken the big bad. That has consistently not proven itself long-term. It's a very tempting move to try to do. The United States tried to do this in Afghanistan twice. Tried to do this back in the 80s with the Mujahideen and the war against the Soviet Union. And then after that, with the rebuilding of Afghanistan. And what has happened? The Taliban is back in control, stronger than ever. Tried to do that in Iraq. Also encouraging different militias, the Kurds. Tried to do that in Syria. In most of these cases, splitting organizations, which essentially means pouring money and pouring ammunition and guns into rival factions in order to weaken your true enemy, whether it's Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, you're trying to strengthen a rival faction. That usually historically does not work. I'll say also in our current context, within Israel, that one of the reasons that the Israeli government over the years really propped up the Hamas administration, funded it, allowed Qatar to send hundreds of millions of dollars to the Gaza Strip, was out of that vision of split the Palestinian leadership. You have the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, will encourage Hamas in Gaza, and that way, if they're divided, then they're going to be a lot easier to control. That blew up on October 7th. Now, if we're looking at a more smaller version in the Gaza Strip, I think that in Israel, there probably is this perception of, okay, if there's rival Palestinian factions and they are armed, Hamas is going to be busy with them. They'll weaken Hamas. Maybe they'll be able to overthrow Hamas. And I understand, like I said, usually that is the immediate instinct that a lot of countries have. Historically, it doesn't tend to work out in favor of the countries that are funding these different organizations. And again, the examples are endless. Somalia, Yemen, Algeria, Libya, the attempts to fund local organizations and say, you go deal with my big bad enemy, and so I won't have to, historically has not worked out well for the country that's doing that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but phase one, by all means, is complete except for the fact that we have not seen the return of all of the dead hostages from Gaza yet. My question is, what about phase two? Where does the negotiation process begin for phase two? Was that going simultaneously while the negotiations for phase one was happening? And when will we have any clarity on when we will see another significant step toward the peace deal?
So I'll say two things. First of all, there is also an argument to be made that phase one is not complete, because part of phase one was also opening the Rafah crossing and allowing for the exit of injured Palestinians and also allowing the entry of heavy industrial equipment into the Gaza Strip in order to allow Hamas, actually in order to allow another governing body, because it's not supposed to be Hamas, but in reality, it would be Hamas at this point, to start clearing the rubbles in order to start clearing out the centers of the cities that, again, are just reduced to rubble in order to allow refugees and internally displaced people to come back. A lot of that didn't happen. The Rafah crossing has been delayed in its opening. Israel has refused to allow the entrance of heavy industrial equipment. Israel is saying it's doing that because Hamas refused to return the bodies of hostages. Hamas is saying they cannot return more bodies of hostages because they're buried under the rubble, and so they need the industrial equipment. Israel is saying that's a lie. Hamas has at least 10 more bodies that they can return. And so right now it's a stalemate where both sides are accusing the other one of not fulfilling phase one of the deal. That said, as you pointed out, even if phase one of the deal, when we're seeing pictures now of what I'm talking about, the decimation in the Gaza Strip, even if phase one was entirely complete, one of the challenges within Trump's 20-point plan, and I kept on saying whenever I was asked about it, that it should be looked at more as a vision. rather than a plan. And it's a vision that does look at what will be the future of the Gaza Strip, future governance, how will sides come together, what will be de-radicalization mechanisms, but it does not actually have a concrete plan of how this is implemented on the ground. That's why they needed to negotiate phase one. Again, Trump's 20-point plan said that all the hostages will come back, Palestinian prisoners will be released, Rafah crossing will open, and we can move on. That needed to be negotiated. Who are the Palestinian prisoners? What is the timetable? How much aid comes in? All needed to be negotiated, and that's what they signed last week. Now, phase two, which is supposed to talk about an international transition force, some sort of international military will be made up of armies of different Arab and Muslim countries that will take control of areas in the Gaza Strip that the Israeli military will withdraw from after they are terror-free, and you and I talked about what does that mean, and then there will be a transition of power under the Board of Peace that is chaired by Trump and Tony Blair. All of that needs to be worked out. And those negotiations, the United States has said that they've started. Egypt said they've started. There's been one report that Egypt and Qatar submitted to Israel a list of 15 Palestinians who might be the future governance of Gaza. No reports if Israel accepted that or not. But that's all that's been discussed. So there's a lot that will still need to be worked out, even if phase one was entirely complete. And one of the glaring issues in Trump's 20-point plan, and like I said, as a vision, as a framework, it certainly has potential. But one of the glaring issues, and some might say that this is done on purpose and maybe is a favorable thing, possibly, but I also say it brings its own set of challenges. There's no time frame. There is no time frame as to, okay, so when does the Israeli military continue its withdrawal? It says that the Israeli military will continue its withdrawal to the next line. When? That's to be negotiated. This international stabilization force is going to come in. Who gets to decide who's part of that? Can Israel veto that? Or can anyone from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Pakistan to whoever decide that they're sending soldiers to Gaza? Who gets to decide that? At what point, you asked me once, one of the glaring things, at what point is an area considered terror-free? That the Israeli military will withdraw. And who decides that? Is it when Hamas says, I'm done with this territory, or Israel? All that needs to be negotiated. Those negotiations haven't started. So what's happening with phase two? Theoretically, it's supposed to start after the completion of phase one. Maybe phase one is going to be complete with the return of a few more bodies of hostages, maybe not. But what's for sure is that phase two is not ready to be implemented yet. And that's one of the glaring questions. So what happens meanwhile? Because what we're seeing on the ground, Hamas is not waiting. Hamas is rebuilding its force. It's taking out its rivals. It's rearming itself. They're not waiting. So can this negotiation now take a month, 6 months? Will it be done within a week? Honestly, at this point, one of the interesting developments in this war, it's entirely up to the whims of what Trump says. If he says tomorrow, I'm giving a deadline and this has to be done within a week, the sides will sit down. If he says, okay, they're still developing this and this is going to take time, it'll take a month, it'll take 2 months. Right now, everything in the war, there's this sort of like weird stalemate and almost fearful hush in the Gaza Strip. But I've spoken to people and analysts on both sides. They're all saying we're pretty much waiting for what Trump says. And that's why everyone's also trying to analyze those different messages that he puts out.
Before we go, one of the most common questions that I continue to get is more aid getting into the enclave? Has there been a significant influx of food resources since the deal was struck?
Yes. Since the deal was struck, from day one that the hostages were released, there's been an entrance of upwards of 600 aid trucks coming into the Gaza Strip each day. That is the same level of aid that was coming at the beginning of 2025 during that 6-week truce that was agreed upon then. It's not enough to actually satisfy all the needs of 2 million people in Gaza, but it's certainly a vast increase from what we were looking at before, which was several dozen aid trucks coming in per day. One of the big questions, though, is how is that aid being distributed? Because one of the things that Hamas insisted on consistently in all the negotiations is that the aid be distributed through the United Nations mechanisms that Israel historically has accused UNRWA and others of cooperating with Hamas and allowing them to take over the aid, to take taxes on the aid. And that is something that was a little bit surprising. In Trump's 20-point plan, it says explicitly that the aid will be distributed solely through the United Nations and its different agencies. So that's what's happening on the ground. The aid is coming into the Gaza Strip. It's being distributed by the United Nations. We are seeing prices coming down in markets. We are seeing less and less reports of hunger conditions in the Gaza Strip. But what's happening behind the scenes is Hamas starting to claim taxes over the routes that trucks are coming in and starting to demand that agencies pay it in back channels, pay it back some of the profits of selling the aid or things like that. That we don't know. I'll say I will not be surprised if that's what's happening, considering that Hamas's consistent demand is that this be the mechanism. They likely had a reason that they wanted this to be the mechanism. So probably that's also meanwhile happening behind the scenes.
Thankfully, no deceptive birds flying through our Gaza shot today, Alon. Alon is the host of the Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. Go give him a subscribe. Good to see you, Alon. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.